is going on, all you wonderful A-plusers out there? It is I, Stuart, here once again with another review for you guys. This time it's going to be a double review because I did miss the episode last week, or I missed my review for that episode last week. But here it is, My Adventures with Superman, episodes, I believe, 5 and 6. 5 being You Will Believe That a Man Can Lie, and 6 being With a Mad Scientist, or My Adventures with a Mad Scientist. So, starting with episode number 5, You Will Believe a Man Can Lie. Basically, this episode is after Lois finds out that Clark Kent is Superman, and she is trying to get Clark to admit to her that he is Superman. And while this is going on, there is a subplot with Jimmy Olsen getting really excited for a camping trip where he, Clark, and Lois are all going to go and search for Bigfoot near Area 51, which there is a fun twist about in the next episode, which I will get to, which I actually kind of like their take on Area 51 in this show, but I'll get to that in a moment. But meanwhile, while this is going on, Lombard wants to do a project with Jimmy, and Jimmy is under the impression that this is a project for the Daily Planet. During this whole thing, we see that Jimmy has been working on this, web series where he talks about the unknowns, because of course, this is a Jimmy that's very much into conspiracies, specifically conspiracies that are related to the supernatural. Something I really like about some of the things that Jimmy Olsen brings up is a lot of them are kind of fun DC Easter eggs, like Atlantis, for example, is of course the big one that comes to my mind, but there are a couple others, but I can't really think of them off the top of my head. But I do really like the Easter egg aspect of his conspiracy theories, because we as DC fans know that he's not completely off on a lot of his theories, especially kind of when we're assuming that this does take place in a fully developed DC world. But of course, whether or not we see more of that in this series going forward, I guess only time will tell. But while that's going on, Lois and Clark are doing a investigative journalism report about the weapons that have been stolen together, while Clark is trying to do this with Lois so he can tell Lois how he really feels about her. Lois is doing this with Clark because she's trying to get Clark to finally admit that he's Superman, of course, which he doesn't do throughout the entire time. There's even a point where Lois handcuffs herself to Superman, thinking that, there's no way you won't be able to get away from me now. And her whole thing about that is trying to keep Superman with her so that she could tell Superman that, hey, I'm not letting you go until my friend Clark gets here and we can interview you together. And it's a pretty funny gag for the most part. I will say that there were times where, because obviously I think all of us as viewers knew that Superman could break out of that handcuff at any moment he wanted to. So I think that there were a couple times where I thought it was really dumb that he didn't, because they just really wanted to have a little bit of extra comedy in there, and I think it worked in that aspect, but it didn't really make sense character wise, because he ends up putting Lois in some dangerous situations that she very, very barely escapes from, because he's basically trying to have her dodge all these dangerous weapons very last minute. So in that area, it slightly felt out of character, but it wasn't so out of character that it ruined the episode. It was just they kind of had to sacrifice a little bit of I don't know what you would call it, making sense for the character just so they could add the gag. But I think because the gag was funnier than the character, it was so funny I didn't mind it being out of character, if that makes sense, because it was such a minor thing. And then when he does eventually break out of the handcuffs because he has to go somewhere really dangerous, it felt a lot more like the actual Superman in that area. But again, it wasn't like he was taking her into this epic dangerous battle or anything. It was just kind of small situations here and there and stuff. But regardless, we do get a really, really epic battle. But before I get to that, I want to get a little more into the Jimmy and Lombard stuff, because Lombard tries to warn Jimmy that basically Clark and Lois are kind of into each other, and they seem to be kind of leaving him out as the third wheel, and kind of seeing him as more of an inconvenience than anything else, which of course Jimmy doesn't believe, which he shouldn't, because despite the fact that Clark and Lois do have feelings for each other, they do really care about Jimmy, as we definitely see in the next episode. But unfortunately, Lombard eventually does get to Jimmy's head, and at the end of the episode, so basically there's this giant, big epic battle, and we finally do, I think it's pretty much confirmation at this point that the general that we see is for sure General Lane. Mostly because like Lois does kind of bring up her dad in the next episode, and because just the fact that he's only referred to as the general, I think it is pretty safe to say, and also like the fact that he has authority over Amanda Waller, as we also see in this episode during this big epic fight at the end. I think it is definitely safe to say that General Lane, or that the general that we see is for sure General Lane. So I am very curious how that dynamic is going to play out between him and Lois later on. I'm definitely really excited to see what happens down that road. And I'm also very curious, is Clark going to meet General Lane in person as Clark, and are we going to get kind of a similar Spider-Man moment? So those of you that don't know what I'm talking about, there was a moment in the movie Spider-Man Homecoming where Spider-Man, knowing that Adrian Toomes is the Vulture, but Adrian Toomes not really realizing that Peter Parker is Spider-Man, and then piecing it together himself in his head. I'm kind of wondering if we're going to get a similar moment like that with General Lane, where he meets Clark Kent, doesn't think much of him at first, but then puts a couple pieces together in his head and kind of realizes that Clark Kent is Superman. I'm curious if we're going to get something like that. But one thing is for sure, that General Lane does not see himself as the villain, which most villains in general tend not to. But in this show, it does kind of feel like a lot of our villains have been very two-dimensional. A lot of times when I'm talking about the villains, I'm really talking about like the design and a lot of their tactics. I'm not really talking about their motivations, and that's because for the most part, this show doesn't really give us much to go on when it comes to the villain motivations. And I think the only exception we've had so far is General Lane, as we do see that he does see Superman as a real threat, and there is supposedly some history with him and Superman, which I'm very confused about, because even though we see a couple of flashbacks of Superman as a kid, and we do see there was an article about it, I'm very curious what Superman did as a kid that scared General Lane enough to make him like his number one target. So I'm very curious to see how that all goes along. But after this, Lois finally, like, basically kind of like from the Richard Donner movie. It actually, to me though, it actually kind of made more sense in the show, given that Lois is a lot younger than she was in the Richard Donner movies. So at the very end, she basically jumps off of the building of the Daily Planet, trying to force Clark to prove that he is indeed Superman. And of course, this plan of hers does work, and Clark is understandably not happy about it, while Lois is also not happy that Clark has kept a secret from her this whole time. Very, very interesting dynamic there, because I don't think either one of them are fully in the right. Now, there has been a lot of like controversy around this, people saying that Lois is in the wrong here, and I do kind of agree. I do think that the way she went about it, definitely, I think that if anything, she should have just straight up asked Clark Kent in person if he was Superman. Before going to the extreme of jumping off of the building. But again, I do actually kind of like the way it was done in this more than in the movie, because again, in the movie, Lois Lane is a grown woman. She knows way better. In this, I want to say that Lois is probably in her early 20s, so it makes sense that she would do something really, really dumb like this. So to me, it didn't bother me as much. It seems something like right up her alley for someone her age. So I didn't mind it, and I didn't think I think that people are really blowing it out of proportion with Lois Lane. It makes sense for both sides to be pissed off at each other at this point. But unfortunately, this does lead to both of them completely forgetting about the camping trip with Jimmy Olsen, and therefore he ends up going alone and then letting what Lombard said to him originally kind of get to his head. Also, we do find out that the project he was working on with Lombard was nothing actually, for the Daily Planet. It was just a weird thing where Lombard is trolling Jimmy Olsen, not knowing that he's trolling Jimmy Olsen online, basically just trying to say all of his conspiracy theories are stupid, which, I mean, god damn, if like, how much of a life do you have to not have to like not just leave a comment below saying that everything you say is wrong, but make a full-on video where you're just making fun of the person. Like, that's, I don't know. To me, you have to have like no life at all to go and do something like that. That is just ridiculous, I think. I think that was the one thing that was like really silly at the very end of the episode. I actually would have liked to have kind of a thing where Jimmy almost like wants to become friends with Lombard, even though he's a jerk. And even, you know, even have like a thing where Clark and Lois kind of warn him about Lombard, but like nothing like that happens. You know, so instead, you know, Jimmy just kind of feels very alone at the very end of the episode, which is pretty sad. But this leads to him getting abducted by seemingly Sasquatch or Bigfoot or whatever you want to call the creature. Basically, the thing that Jimmy had been looking for, which takes us to the next episode. Jimmy's been captured. Lois and Clark are still not very happy with each other, but they of course put their, you know, pettiness aside in order to work together to find Jimmy Olsen. Now, we find out that Jimmy has been taken to this underground base, which turns out to be Cadmus, which in this universe, they say Cadmus is basically this universe's Area 51, which makes a lot of sense because Cadmus does tend to work with a lot of alien tech. Specifically like the alien tech that they tend to keep, you know, hidden from the general public. So I actually really do like this take on Cadmus. Although something really bizarre about it are the characters that we got in this episode working as Cadmus. So we got the brain, and then I totally forgot Mala, yeah, I think that's his name, Mala. Basically the two main villains from Doom Patrol, of all people. There's a couple things I thought were so interesting about this version of these characters. So basically, if you've seen the Doom Patrol TV show, or even if you've seen the Teen Titans cartoon, you may have an idea of what these characters are like in the comic books. This is nothing at all like their comic book counterparts. This is like the most different take you could have had with these characters. Because for one, they're not really evil. They're just kind of like in hiding, specifically from Sam Lane, because they're apparently, you know, he sees the two of them as a threat because they're different. The other thing is, when they were working at Cadmus and it was just them, they were working on experiments to benefit the world rather than trying to create weapons like, you know, the military wanted. So that was one of the reasons that like Task Force X basically infiltrated and kind of like destroyed the entire area, creating like an artificial black hole. The other thing that's kind of interesting about this version of the two characters, now they never say it directly, at least not that I can see it, but there is a hint at a romance between the two of them, which I don't think is something that's been done in the comic books before, but I think is a very, very interesting take on the two characters. A very interesting new dynamic with the two of them. That again, that if we have seen that before, definitely let me know in the comments below, but I don't think we have. And again, they never directly say it, so maybe I'm just like looking into it a bit too deep, but to me, I got some gay vibes from the two of them, but like I'm not sure if that's actually what they were going for in the episode. But regardless, like I said, they're not evil like they are in the comic books. Why did they capture Jimmy? Well, because they thought Jimmy was a spy and that he was working for the US military. The moment they find out he's not a threat, while the brain still wants to, you know, kill him just to be safe, the gorilla is like, no, he's no threat to us. Let's you know, give him a tour. So it's really interesting. Jimmy basically vents about his frustrations to the two of them, and I like how the two of them kind of give him advice, like saying, hey, you know, if you're feeling this way about your friends, maybe you should actually tell them that this is how you feel and see what happens from there. And then eventually Lois and Clark do find their way into the base, but they are attacked by these robots that seem to be producing a signature of red sun, but not like a full on, like it's not like they're full on red sun like signatures, because if it was, then Clark's powers would be completely gone, but it's definitely enough to weaken Clark. So his when he's like trying to fight back against them, he's not as strong as he normally is. And throughout, Lois and Clark kind of journeying to find Jimmy Olsen, the two of them kind of apologize to each other. Clark for not telling Lois Lane sooner, and then Lois Lane also for kind of realizing that she did kind of come off in a way that made it hard for Clark to know whether or not he could trust her. One thing I really do love is when the three of them do finally, reunite, when they find each other. We have a moment. Okay, so for context, I was watching this episode on the bus, and even though I've chuckled at the show a couple of times here and there, I wouldn't say I ever really laughed out loud that much until the moment Clark is about to reveal himself to Jimmy Olsen, because in my head, when he was about to reveal his identity to Jimmy Olsen, I thought they were going to go under attack. He was going to have to hide to become Superman and then save the day again. And then something was going to happen that would convince Clark that maybe it's not a good idea to tell Jimmy quite yet. No. The moment he's about to take his glasses off, Jimmy's like, yes, I know you're Superman, God. And I started busting a gut because I just didn't see that coming. So I'm on the bus laughing, and I look up and I see like a lot of people looking at me at that moment. It was really funny. And then on top of that too, he's just like, how'd you know? And Jimmy's just like brings up all these, hilarious examples. Like one of them being that the first day we moved in together, the door handle fell off. And I like this explanation because I was wondering this shit in the first episode. Because the first episode, Clark breaks an alarm clock, while Jimmy is literally in the same room as him. I think, if I'm not mistaken, doesn't he break a door down or something like that also by accident? So basically, it makes so much sense that Jimmy would have known this whole time. He just didn't say anything because, Clark didn't want to bring it up to him. So, why would Jimmy want to bring it up to Clark if it's a topic that Clark doesn't want to talk about? Now, the thing I loved at the very end of this is when, Clark, when Jimmy and Lois kind of ask why it took Clark this long to tell the two of them, he just says because he never wanted these powers to begin with. It's very much like his character in Smallville. He wants to live a normal life. He wants to be normal like everyone else. So it's not necessarily that he doesn't trust the two of them. It's more just that he just didn't want to accept that this is who he was. Something I also really love is how the two of them, they eventually, there's a whole subplot about a wormhole, how the brain and the gorilla are trying to stabilize it so they can find like a parallel dimension where they might be more accepted. They offer Clark a chance to go with him, but Clark of course turns him down because he does want to believe that the world will eventually accept him, and if it doesn't, he can change their minds by doing these good deeds and showing that he's just there to help. There is no alternate there is no ulterior motive or anything. He just wants to be a good person, and he wants to make sure the world knows that. And I really did love that moment. But eventually, the two of them do go into the wormhole, and we don't really know what the result's going to be for the two of them. But we can always hope that it's going to be the best. But as soon as they leave the facility, General Sam Lane and Dr. Ivo appear, and basically Sam Lane hires Ivo to work with the tech to build something that can kill Superman. And that's kind of where we end the episode. These two episodes really step things up. Not that the other episodes before this were bad. So far, I haven't seen an episode of the show that I didn't like. However, I did start to notice that it was feeling a little bit formulaic, but not in a bad way, but just in a way that it was going to make it really difficult to review later on. And as you can kind of see, my reviews of this show are really short in general, and that's just because it's a show that's really short, only 22 minutes, and not much happens in each episode. So these last two episodes were definitely a really good change of pace. And I think I might start just reviewing this show like every other week, only because it's just easier to do two episodes at once, and I feel like I can just say a lot more, and it's not, I'm not just trying to drag out a review like I was like the last few episodes. I'm sure it was super noticeable. But yeah, overall, again, really great last couple of episodes. I think these two have definitely been the best so far of the season, and I hope it keeps going uphill from here. Yeah, great couple of episodes. Overall, if I'm giving these two a rating, I guess I'd give episode 5, mostly for kind of the dramatic moments that I thought were really good. I'd give it a solid B. The only reason I'm not giving episode 5 an A is because, again, I thought the Jimmy and Lombard stuff could have been tweaked a little bit. I think it could have been better. I liked what they were going for, but it just, I don't know. I feel like the way they wrote Lombard just made him like a weird bully, who seemed like he was trying to do good for Jimmy, but then with that reveal they had at the very end of it, I just think it's just kind of, it would have been better to me if Lombard actually did have good intentions, and therefore, you know, it would make it even harder for Jimmy, you know, to deal with what Lombard told him about, you know, Clark and Lois, how they don't really like him. It would have been, you know, it would have been harder for Jimmy to not accept that, if that makes sense. So I think that's the reason I'm giving that episode a B. This episode 6, though, I think I would probably give that one a very solid, if not A minus, you know, somewhere between A and A minus. Again, you know, really good episode, and I think this was the one that was like probably my favorite of the season. Actually, no, I kind of take that back. Not my favorite of the season, even though I gave the other one a lower grade. I think I did still enjoy it more, specifically because of that battle with Sam Lane, but I did really think that this one was solid all the way through, and I really love some of the Jimmy moments between him and specifically the gorilla. I think the two of them had some really funny character dynamics together. So I think that's what really made me want to bump up my grade from a B to an A minus for episode 6. So yeah, overall though, those were my thoughts on the episode. But of course, at the end of the day, these are just my A+ opinions. We here at A+ Opinions always want to know what you guys think, so definitely let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to our channel. But guys, above all, don't forget to keep it A+, and I will talk to you all later. Goodbye.